Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at NuScale power. It is time for another update, and today we'll be discussing here the break below the area of support. And on this chart we have been tracking mainly this idea of a potential double 1-2-1-2 setup, and even though it was clearly stated this is not the only interpretation, it was rather a preferred scenario until we actually got more evidence that we should be tracking a rather different structure. And honestly, even at this point, I do still see this scenario as possibly because this is the break here below the last level of support is not yet a sustained break. Yeah, if it's just a quick dip and on Monday we open the market, for example, above the 78.6% retracement, and then we start a slow but significant uptrend going on, this could still be salvaged. This scenario could still work out, and overall, for complete invalidation of this interpretation, we would actually need a break here below the beginning of this wave 1. Now, in this smaller time frame, within this correction, we have been tracking this idea of a larger ABC structure to be unfolding ever since we actually failed to continue in a more direct fashion in a stronger movement to the upside in this area. And again, this is not the only possible interpretation. I did mention even before that this could actually be the wave 1 top and that this could be a larger ABC movement to be forming, but as I was mentioning even then, after such a large 5-wave move correction, it is easily expected and possible for us to form a more significant relief rally, for example, something like an ABC structure within a wave B. And sure, we would expect afterwards, after this 5-wave move to the downside, where we would consider this to be the larger, more significant top, we would expect with high probability after the 3-wave correction continuation in another 5-wave move to the downside. But again, we would still expect to see a more significant relief rally within this area anyway. Now, clearly, we have some divergences going on in this area. We clearly have the momentum slowing down, and even though it is not impossible by any means for this trend downside to continue in an even stronger fashion, it is not necessarily a high probability interpretation for me. I would much rather expect that even if we fail to hold here the area of support, even if we hold a sustained break below the 78.6% retracement, that we should see in the rather short term, shorter rather than longer, a larger relief rally to start forming. And to be honest, this continuation lower is not really a surprise. Ever since we have failed to hold here an internal area of support that we were tracking for a more direct breakout, we were clear stating that we should expect a larger fifth wave to form. We were siding here with preference for the orange interpretation, which would have allowed, or rather even required, another low to be formed within this area, and surely it did. We did expect to get here to the 78.6% retracement. Now clearly we see some more significant extensions lower, and in the previous video we were looking here at this area of resistance to allow still another low within the fifth wave. I was mentioning that even though this structure could be sufficient for a wave 3 to the downside, I was actually preferring that we get here a fourth and a fifth to complete this larger structure. Now clearly the wave 4 did push a little higher than we had already achieved in the previous video. We basically pushed here perfectly into the 38.2% retracement at the $17 level, and then we formed here a larger ABC movement to the downside, which honestly could be complete. Technically, I don't need any additional lows within this structure to consider this pattern complete. This is really only fulfilled what was expected of it. It formed the A wave down, the B wave up, and a 5-wave move to the downside within the wave C, and nothing is really out of place here. Now, don't get me wrong, at this point I do quite heavily prefer that we actually form a bottom, but this movement to the downside could easily find extensions, because I could even go as far as to consider that this was a larger wave 1, a wave 2, a third wave down, a fourth wave up, and then this would be a fifth wave down. In such a scenario, I would in fact expect a 3-wave retracement, but then another 5-wave move to the downside, because on the larger structure, we do actually track a larger ending diagonal within this wave C. We wouldn't expect to form a 5-wave move to the downside within this area to complete this structure, although it is a bit interpretable because it is on such a small time frame, and it is actually possible for me to track this movement to the downside in both cases. And it is a bit unfortunate, but it this is really what it is. Nothing really we can do about such an interpretation. And right now, if I want to track even further continuation lower within this fifth wave, well, I would probably prefer to be tracking a larger ABC movement on the smaller time frame in this area, where sure, this could extend even further lower. Yeah, again, we don't assume that we find a bottom within the larger area of support, and even though we had here a tiny reaction before the daily close on the previous day, we didn't manage to hold. We don't assume that just because we have a possible area of support that we are going to hold. We need to find the confirmation. We need to track the structure to its completion, and if it takes us below the area of support, we need to take that into account in tracking the overall market sentiment. Now, again, it is possible for us to extend here even lower within such an A, B, C structure, in which case we have here the resistance levels between the $15.7 level all the way up to the $16.7 level. Now, this is really only applicable as long as we don't form additional lows, because then this area of resistance will need to move along with this wave A low. And while we have here a tiny resistance area on a smaller time frame, I would actually still need to break above the larger resistance area for the interpretation of a larger ABC movement that could actually still be unfolding in this area. And let's say we track this in a blue interpretation, and for those we actually, or for this interpretation, we actually have another area of resistance, so we have quite a lot to deal with to prove that this structure has already found the bottom. But firstly, I would need to get here, for even consideration of this scenario, or even serious consideration of this scenario, I would need to get here to the 38.2% retracement, at least at the $17.6 level, and a break above the $21.2 level at the 78.6% retracement would be a signal that this structure would be rather expected to have already bottomed, and that we should be in a larger movement to the upside. Yeah, this structure would be expected to be done. We wouldn't look for any additional lows within a fifth wave or any other pattern in this area, and we would prefer to track a larger movement to the upside. Now, even though, as I was mentioning, we are still tracking this idea of a 1-2 setup, again, there is no sustained break just yet, and we are just above some structural support levels. If you are interested to look for a potential area to find some additional support, it would be here right around the $14.4 level, maybe to the $14.5 level. Yeah, basically this previous swing low that allowed a more significant reaction to the upside is still in play. That should help us to find a more significant bottom, although again, no guarantees. It is an area to look out for, however. Now, again, if we happen to actually sustain below the larger area of support in white and we don't manage to get a quick recovery, we do need to start considering other scenarios. And for that, I actually bring here on the chart a larger interpretation where a more significant wave 1 top would be expected to be in play here in yellow. So we would already have a large 5-way move to the upside. It would still be a bullish interpretation overall, but this would actually even prefer much further continuation lower, because in this scenario I would really be tracking only a 5-way move to the downside in a wave A, as we have here. Now that is if we don't extend too much in a more direct fashion, that it would be expected to be a more direct correction. But in this interpretation, in the case of the sustained break below the 78.6% retracement, we would expect a wave A down, possibly bottoming at any point here, and then a B wave up, and then a C wave to the downside. The only real difference is that if we manage to still hold here the 78.6% retracement, the $15.6 level in white, we can still salvage and form a more direct breakout, where if we don't manage to hold that level, we should be rather prepared for further continuation lower after the correction in the wave B to the upside, because again, we have a 5-wave move to the downside. The only difference that we can really track at this point is the sustainability of the internal structure in a potential 1-2 setup in this area, because if it is a sustained break, again, the probabilities heavily shift from such a scenario to a more bearish implication, at least on the shorter time frame, because on this chart there is really no specific reason to be particularly bearish overall. But yeah, in the shorter time frame or mid time frame, let's say, we could see further continuation lower even in a more bullish scenario, even in an interpretation where we do manage to hold here the 78.6% retracement. And we do need to be aware that even though the rest of the market could be finding additional highs in this overall period, let's say, this chart could form only a more significant relief rally within this area. And for now, these are the levels. This is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover, and I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.